Hello and welcome. All this week we're coming to you live from London as we look at some of the most critical issues facing the United Kingdom ahead of the country's national elections, which have to be called by a deadline of this summer. The vote will be significant for several reasons. Not only is Great Britain working to support its economy against the global downturn while escalating its commitment to the war in Afghanistan, but it could also be facing a leadership shift from Labour to Conservative for the first time in more than a decade. Well, for the electorate, which seems to be increasingly divided over the war in Afghanistan, there are serious concerns about the increase in deployments, the commitment of its allies, and outfitting and training of those sent to fight al-qaeda and the Taliban. At the centre of it is a lingering doubt that seems to be growing, with many wondering what prospect there is for a foreign army to achieve any significant change in a country that has a long history of defeating empires. On today's show, we asked the British Defence Secretary Bob Ainsworth what is at the core of the mission in Afghanistan and how will the NATO coalition succeed where so many others have failed. Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or an email, and we'll be sure to include them in the show. Well, joining me now is Bob Ainsworth, who was appointed British Defence Secretary in June 2009. Elected to Parliament in 1992 from Coventry, he was made Minister of State for the Armed Forces in 2007. And since taking on the defence portfolio, Mr. Ainsworth has argued that British troops serving abroad should have gotten stronger support from the outset of their missions. Mr. Ainsworth, welcome to the show.
Hi.
So, well, first of all, London's gearing up for the much publicised Afghanistan conference, which is due this week, featuring, among others, the US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and the Afghan President himself, Hamid Karzai. Do you really expect anything new to come out of the gathering, considering how long everything's been going on?
I think it's a really good opportunity for us to capture international support for the government of Afghanistan. I mean, we've considerably increased our military commitment to the country over the last few months. General McChrystal asked for 40,000 additional troops. I think he's got around about the 40,000 that he asked for. But we need civilian support, we need good governance, we need commitments from the Afghan government as well to tackle things like corruption. If the politics is going to keep up with the military improvement that's now quite possible.
Because, of course, there's a lot of speculation that the conference is there to help prop up Mr. Karzai, who was elected under such a cloud, such a what was considered a very flawed election last year. And I wonder to what extent is it a case of being stuck with Mr. Karzai and therefore having to make him look respectable again?
Well, it was a far from perfect election, but I've heard no credible people say that he isn't the most popular candidate, and he made a very good inaugural speech containing all of the issues that need to be addressed. But those need to be delivered. Speeches are one thing that politicians make all around the world, and but delivery is another thing. So we need to see him deliver, but we need to help him to deliver as well. We need to recognise that Afghanistan can't do these things on their own, that they'll need assistance from outside for many, many years to come.
He's struggling to put together a cabinet. A lot of problems with him, even getting everything stable as it is. Do you have real confidence in him, considering his track record?
I think a lot of the key ministries have been filled. Yes, of course, there's accountability, and there are issues over some of the appointments. But I think he is the elected president. He is the person that we have to work with, and we can work with. And as I've said, a lot of what it was, the content of his inaugural speech was exactly what we wanted here. We need to get behind him now.
Now, we on this show, we try to get viewer questions in as much as possible. And we had a few sent in. If I could give you a couple from our viewers around the world, I'll put them back to back. They're on a similar theme. The first one's from a viewer in the UK who wrote into our Al Jazeera Your Views page on the web saying, once we realise that we aren't going to achieve anything useful in Afghanistan, then we pull out, claim some sort of absurd victory and leave behind a trail of misery and destruction before moving on to the next country. Where does it end? And the second was to our Facebook page from a viewer by the name of Aryan Niazi, who says, what assurance do we get from the British and its allies that they will not leave Afghanistan alone again? Considering the war fatigue and the sense of uncertainty people have, what guarantee is there that Afghanistan isn't going to be left to flail?
Well, it isn't, because there's cross-party support for the mission in Afghanistan, and we're going to stay there until the Afghan government is capable and the Afghan security forces are capable of standing on their own 2 feet, defending their country and living at peace with their neighbours. We have no desires. Other than that, we've no desires to conquer Afghanistan or to be in control of Afghanistan. We want to see Afghanistan join the international community, be a peaceful neighbour, and not be a threat to us back in the United Kingdom as they were in the past. And we fully intend to stay there until they're able to do that. So transition and building up the Afghans' own capability is now the most important thing.
And one of the things that's being discussed, I gather, at the conference is the idea of possibly providing some kind of financial support for the Taliban to lay down their arms. An idea that's been tried before and hasn't been very successful. So what suggestion is there that the Taliban might be willing to be bought this time, and that if the money doesn't stop, they won't get back to their arms and start fighting again?
Well, it isn't a case of buying people at all, but the insurgency in Afghanistan has very different aspects. At the one end, there are people who are wedded to international jihad and re-establishment of the caliphate or whatever, irreconcilable people. But there are other people who have local grievances, who have no other alternative for making their way in the world. Now, what we don't want to do is to bribe them, but what we do want to do is to provide them with those alternatives, provide them with an opportunity to play a part in their society, and therefore potentially win them away from the insurgency and over to support, for the direction of the Afghan government. And yes, of course, we need, resources in order to be able to do that, but that's not bribery, far from it.
How are you going to be sure you can target the funds to go the right way so it doesn't just become another resource for the Taliban in terms of financial military resource?
Well, we would need commitment from the individuals themselves as to what they were going to do, how they were going to conduct themselves, and how they were going to reintegrate with Afghan society. But we've got to reach out, and overwhelmingly this is going to be the Afghan government itself. We're there in support of the Afghan government, but they've got to reach out to all sections of Afghan community. There shouldn't be any people who are excluded from the political settlement in Afghanistan.
It's interesting, your American counterpart, Defense Secretary Bob Gates, has acknowledged that the Taliban are a part of Afghanistan's, quote, political fabric, as he puts it, which then suggests that after 9/11, when President Bush went in to basically wipe out the Taliban, America was immediately going from a very ill-conceived starting point.
Well, we went into Afghanistan because the Afghan government, yes, the Taliban government of the day, would not give up. Al-qaeda insisted on continuing to provide safe havens for them within the country. Now, had they been prepared to do that, had they been prepared to accept the threat that faced all of us from within their own country at that time, then I think history would have been very different, but they weren't. And that's why the invasion took place. Now, having gone in, having removed large parts of al-Qaeda core capability from Afghanistan, we have a duty to continue to persevere and to get Afghanistan to a place where they're able to look after themselves, defend themselves, and provide basic wherewithal for their own people. So that's what we're there to do now, and we're not going to give up, we're not going to walk away until that job's been done. Well,
interestingly enough, a viewer from Pakistan wrote in expressing a sentiment that we hear very often, which came in from Rasim Umar Gauri, who says, no foreign forces can win in Afghanistan. That is history's lesson. It does seem that history does repeat itself so much.
Well, foreign forces in the past, and I read the history as well, and we've been involved in this way back in Queen Victoria's day when we tried to conquer Afghanistan. But that's what foreign forces have effectively been trying to do in the past. They've been trying to, win Afghanistan for a particular empire. That's not what this force is trying to do at all. And I think that if we were, then we would be doomed to failure. But we're trying to assist the Afghans. We have no, as I've said, desire to continue to control or to impose some foreign methodology on the Afghan people. We want to assist them to live in peace with their neighbours, to be able to provide for their own people. And when that job's done, I mean, the British flag comes down in Camp Bastion, the Afghan flag goes up, we come home, very happy to be friends with a free Afghan republic.
Well, let's put a question to you that came in from Ansar Bakshi in the UK, who wrote in saying, As a British citizen, I would like to ask a simple question. After a brutal 9-year engagement, what have the UK and US achieved in Afghanistan, apart from civilian deaths, a destructive insurrection, a venal and odious regime, lack of any basic public service provision, and resentment from the Afghans? What would you say are the positives? I mean, he doesn't seem to think there are many.
Well, we removed, right at the very start of this, core al-qaeda capability, which was pledged to the destruction of our society and our people back here in Britain as well as in America, because those attacks on America were not aimed at America alone. The same thing could have happened in Great Britain, and we were threatened directly from al-qaeda, protected by the Taliban government, and existent and with very real capability within Afghanistan. Now, if we were to leave now, then I think that the Taliban would be successful, at least in part of the country. If not in the entire country, they would overrun the government. Would they welcome back al-qaeda? Then highly likely they would. There are parts of the Taliban insurgency who are still of the same view as al-qaeda and very closely linked to them. So we can't leave the job having only been partly done, and we're determined that we're not going to do that.
Well, didn't Britain essentially become a target because it followed America into its largely ill-conceived wars, as everyone recognises now, with Iraq, with Afghanistan and so on? Hasn't Britain put itself in the position of becoming a target?
Well, this is said popularly and continually, and people choose to forget that 9/11 happened before Afghanistan, 9/11 happened before Iraq, and people choose to say you were only a target because you went into Iraq, because you went into Afghanistan. Quite the reverse is the case. We went into Afghanistan with a UN mandate, with UN support, following the attacks on the Twin Towers in New York.
It was an attack on America.
It was an attack on America, but we're part of NATO, and NATO has provided us with security in this country for the last 60 years. There are people in Great Britain who fondly believe that we're capable of providing our own security on our own without any assistance, but we depend upon our allies and the treaty obligations that we enter into. America was attacked, and we had an obligation to come to America's aid. We would have expected the same in reverse, and that was an obligation that was triggered by those attacks on the Twin Towers. But does anybody believe that al-qaeda, their only enemy was America, that we're not part of what they see as the great Satan? We are part of that same problem as far as al-qaeda is concerned. They are as much our enemy as they are America's.
So I'm going to ask you to stand by. We're going to take a very short break here now. More of our discussion in a moment. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're taking a British perspective on international conflicts and security, particularly Afghanistan and the escalation of NATO forces there. For the United Kingdom, 2009 marked its deadliest year in the 9-year conflict, yet the country has committed to contribute an even larger number of troops. Discussing these issues with me is Britain's Defence Secretary Bob Ainsworth. Let's get back to some questions. One thing I wonder, when we're talking about the justification for going into these conflicts, what do you expect from the former British Prime Minister Tony Blair at the Iraq inquiry, when he appears on Friday to answer claims that he took Britain into a war that was unnecessary and according to the Foreign Ministry, was actually illegal?
Well, look, we have an inquiry. We've had inquiries before into aspects of the war in Iraq, and there's a great desire to understand fully our involvement in Iraq. I think we have to wait for the end of that. It's a popular media pastime to follow the story and to jump to the conclusions when the story is only halfway told. Sir John Chilcot has a job to do. He'll interview Tony Blair, as he's interviewed a lot of other people, and he'll reach some conclusions which he will put in the public domain. And I think we need to wait until those times. I was a member of Parliament at the time. I voted for the intervention in Iraq, and I think that Saddam Hussein, Iraq's a better place for the removal of Saddam Hussein. There isn't to say that those were the reasons that many people voted for it. We believe that there were weapons of mass destruction that effectively were a threat to the region, and that's why I think Parliament supported the intervention in Iraq at the time.
Of course, that is what's being debated. But I have to ask you, just as the Afghanistan situation is an issue on one front, sort of another front is starting to raise its head, that of Yemen. Yeah. And I wonder to what degree you see that that area as a threat and a growing threat, and one that might also draw on the resources that you have to try to manage when it comes to security of Britain.
Well, we will try to help Yemen in any way that we can. The problems are pretty profound. I mean, the country is running out of oil, which has been the mainstay of its economy for a period of time. Its water resources are becoming ever more scarce, so its ability to provide for its own people is a fundamental underlying problem that the Yemenis have got. And yes, of course, there are various factions and issues within the country, and there is, it seems, a base for al-qaeda operating from Yemen that indeed were responsible for a direct attack on the United States of America a few weeks ago. I think we've got to look at the security threat as well as how we help the Yemeni government, to provide for its people. And I think it's a very difficult, complex situation that they face. And we'll be gathering people together because many of them will be in London for the Afghan conference to see what we can do to garner international support for the situation in Yemen.
Now, there is a view that both that Afghan Security Conference and the one on Yemen as well are both really a ploy by Prime Minister Gordon Brown to try to push his position ahead of the vote, general election coming up in Britain, and his way of increasing his standing prior to that vote. When you have people say things like that, how do you answer that?
Well, the Prime Minister needs to get on with his job, and he is getting on with his job in aspects of that, and the most important aspects of that are the security of our country. And so it would be pretty strange indeed if the Prime Minister wasn't trying to take a lead when we've got 9,500 troops in Afghanistan on Afghan issues and trying to push the agenda forward and make as much progress as we can. And he's not just doing that now, he's been doing that for many a long time. And Yemen, of course, is a rising concern. And so obviously, while we've got people in London, we want to seize the opportunity to get them together and see whether or not there are things that we should and can do to help with that situation.
Is the Labour Party in trouble? How do you expect things to shape up after that date of May the 6th that you and a couple of others inadvertently leaked out?
Well, I was commenting on what may be people's expectations. I have no knowledge of what the actual date will be. That will be for the Prime Minister. We're behind in the polls. Let's not beat about the bush. We've got an uphill battle, but I think the Conservative Party have far from won this election. And as the date gets nearer and people begin to focus on them and not just us, we've been in government for some time now, so there's a tendency to say, to focus on us and what we've done, what we haven't done, and the rest of it. As they start looking at the alternative, I don't think that people are that enamoured with the Conservative policies, so we're still in with a good chance, and we need to fight their election hard.
Of course, a decade in power is a time when the stress is at greatest. The media does love intrigue, and certainly it was the case when it came to the so-called Curry House plot, which you, of course, were supported, reported to be at. Has there been any backlash from that idea that MPs are coming together and questioning Gordon Brown's legitimacy as a leader?
Look, the party's behind Gordon Brown, and so is the cabinet, and people will try to make things where even we'll try to raise issues even where they don't exist. I like eating curry, and I'm a friend of Jeff Hoon, who wrote an email message, and people shouldn't put 2 and 2 together and add it up to 4.
I think but it was the second time it happened. I think probably that didn't help.
Well, politics is politics. Look, we have a leader. He has the support of his cabinet. He has the support of his party. And we are going to fight this election as hard as we can, because I really do worry, that people will wake up with a Conservative government and wonder, what on earth they've done to themselves. It's been a long time since the Conservatives were in power in this country, so not everybody can remember the kind of things that they did. We're overwhelmingly worried at the moment, not just about the security situation, but about the economy. Now, we've done an awful lot to try to help people to stay in their jobs, to stay in their homes, in marked contrast to the behaviour of last Conservative government who tended to leave people to fend for themselves, with the result that we wound up with.
Well, there's challenging
3 million people out of work. And
yeah, I was going to say it's challenging for you at the time when the budget is very much scrutinised and the economy's down, especially when Prime Minister Brown was accused of like tying the purse strings on the military situation for Iraq and for Afghanistan, and sort of crippling what might have been a more successful operation. How have you managed to contend with those claims?
Well, people write stories with the benefit of hindsight, and that's very easy to do. It was Gordon Brown's job when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer to hold the purse strings, and the big criticism comes of decisions that he took in 2004. Let me remind people we only had 400 troops in Afghanistan in 2004. They were in Mazar Sharif in the north of the country, in a relatively benign area. We now have 9,500 troops in Helmand province. Could Gordon Brown be expected to predict that situation? I don't think so. I don't think that anybody else did. So, hindsight's a wonderful thing, and people have to take decisions based on the facts that confront them at the time. They don't have those benefits. One
thing we're definitely seeing in the US, though, is a war fatigue among the general public. How are you coping with that in Britain, with the sense that people are tired here? 251 casualties, I think we reached by the weekend for British troops.
We did. And that's very sad. And when we're losing young people, then there's bound to be a focus on the cost of the operation. And we saw, I think, the public support for our efforts in Afghanistan go down in the autumn. I think that's bottomed out. I believe that they're actually coming back up again, and that there is some small improvement in support for the operation. We've tried to improve our communications. We've tried to involve people in what we're trying to achieve, so they don't only see the downside of the operations. So I think that public support will hold up. I think the British public are pretty robust. I don't think that they believe that we should walk away from something that we've started, that we need to finish it. And so I think we'll be fine on the home front.
Just going to have to see, maybe in May or May the 6th, we may have to see what happens with the voters as well. Mr. Ainsworth, thank you very much for joining us, sir.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for being with us. Remember, you can watch a podcast of the show on iTunes. This week, we're featuring our discussion of President Barack Obama's foreign policy 1 year after taking office. On the next show, we continue to look at the role of British forces in international conflict areas and the toll the war in Afghanistan is taking on Britain's public. We'll be joined by the mother of war resister Joe Glenton, who faces a court hearing in just a few days. Make sure you tune in for that. From me and the teams in DC and London, we'll see you next time.